We're going to be doing a collective hands-on lab, and you might be wondering, how are you going to do this? Well, I'm going to tell you how and show you how. So the first thing, just to let you know, that hands-on labs are going to be based on Visual Studio Team System 2005. There's a really good reason for this. I created a whole series of hands-on labs for that specific version of Team System. So it's an introductory level hands-on lab, but I'll be giving you a link to a drive that will contain Rosario hands-on labs, the introductory 2005 hands-on labs, and advanced 2005 hands-on labs. So if you find the content of this hands-on labs to be a little too basic for your current level, you can go and try out the more complicated ones and enjoy those. So specifically, today we're going to be focusing on the tester version of Team System, or the tester features of Team System. And so specifically, using web testing, load testing, and some of the other test tools. So what I'll do is I'm going to flip to next slide, and need to for today, if you're planning to do any of the hands-on labs following along. In fact, I would recommend you copy these URLs, as they'll provide you with all the resources you need to perhaps go through the hands-on labs at home if you wish. So the first one is a link to a repository with all the hands-on labs that are available, that are posted. And I will actually show you what that looks like in a second. I'm just going to give you a chance to write down all the links to begin with. And I've provided you with 3 links to 3 different VPCs, depending on what version of Visual Studio you want to play with. And finally, a virtual lab environment. So if you don't have a VPC, you haven't brought one in here, the virtual lab environment is a really good environment to work with. And in fact, I'll be using the virtual lab environment as the basis for my presentation today, so that you can follow along pretty much with me using the same tools that I'm using right now. Okay. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, write down the links, and then I'll move on and we'll tackle the hands-on labs. Any questions in the meantime? Okay, so the question was, how do I share a folder between a VPC and my actual environment? And I'm actually going to launch a VPC. Does everybody have the links so far? Who hasn't copied down the links? Certainly. So another thing to consider is that these slides will also be available on the... Okay, hold on a second. I believe they're mostly sequential, except for the last one, which is 8B. Okay, so who hasn't copied down the hands-on lab URLs? Since nobody's raising their hands, I'm going to move on. The first thing I'll show is your question, how do I configure folders in a VPC? Or share folders between a VPC and a standard image. What I can do here is launch my VPC. And you'll notice if I go under Edit Settings, there's an option here for shared folders. And the key thing to remember is that you have to install the virtual machine editions before you can share content between one or the other. In some cases, depending on what operating system you're running, you can sometimes just drag and drop folders. And specifically, I'm launching Rosario right now. And I was able just to copy, or just to drag a file into the VPC, and it copied it onto the desktop. So But the shared folders functionality is right there under the tools options. And if you're wondering, how do I install those additions, in case you're wondering, in case you haven't had the experience of using it. So you click on Actions, and there's this option right here that says Install or Update Machine Additions. Okay. And you click that once the VPC has been fully, you've logged in and you're in the environment. Then you click on that, and it will launch an installer, which will add the functionality to be able to interact between you and the virtual environment. So let me show you some of the resources that I put online, and then we'll move on and start building some stuff using the system. So, sorry about that. That was amplified too. So the first thing is the lab manuals. So I'll copy this, put it into a browser, and you can take a look at it. So you'll notice I set up a SkyDrive, and SkyDrive is a free drive that you can use in the cloud. And if you have a Hotmail account, you get 5 gigs for free. So it's a good place to store files. I call it my USB key in the sky. And essentially, here we have Team System Rosario. So you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different labs here, specifically one for architect, database professional, developer, project management, tester, and version control. So you can just download the VPC, run through these labs, and really understand the interaction between the different pieces of functionality. And the ones we're going to be using today are these basic hands-on labs. So as you can see, they're all in MHT format, so they'll just launch in the browser. And specifically, the one that we're going to use to begin with is this class diagramming one to begin, so that we can create a project that we can then run tests on and other types of functionality. So I'll click here and just click download and open, and you'll see it'll open in the browser, and you'll be able to see the details. So the next thing I'll do is I'm going to launch my virtual environment, and I'd highly recommend you follow along too and launch your own virtual environments. So I'm going to launch my browser, click the link, and it'll send me on the virtual labs page of the MSTN site. So now I can click on Visual Studio Team System. And there's a whole bunch of different virtual labs, and it will allow you to connect to virtual lab for about 90 minutes maximum. These little express links have express 30-minute hands-on labs. So since I don't want this session to cut short by 30 minutes, I'm going to click on one of these hands-on labs. And then it will prompt you to load a virtual machine client for the browser, and it will actually run the virtual machine within this environment. So just take a little second here. All I need to do is click and register. It's about 3 steps, and you're good to go. Are you logging in? Who's going to follow along with the hands-on lab? No? Okay. So I'm confirming my attendance to this event, then it will launch me into the environment. And I click on Virtual Lab, and I should be good to go. Full screen view of your hands-on lab. More real estate. It'll take a second to load, and then we're going to go. So the first one I'm going to take a look at is a class diagramming lab. So what we're going to do is create a blank class diagram and add some code, and then that will be the basis for us to later check in a project and do other tasks within Team System. So how many of you have done class diagrams before? One person. Okay, two. So this should be informational. Okay. Oh, I have 19 minutes left. That's great. Maybe I should pick another pencil. This is not going to go too well. Hold on a second. I'll close this one for the time being. I'm going to pick another one. Any questions in the meantime? No? Actually, you should ask questions because I have free software to give away. So keep some questions in mind. In fact, I have so these. How many of you went to the launch event here in Denver? You did? Nobody else? The Visual Studio 2008 launch event. Okay, one person. Anyways, they were giving out free software. This is a copy of Visual Studio 2008 Standard, a copy of Windows Server 2008 Standard, and a copy of SQL Server CTP with a coupon to redeem the full SQL Server once it comes out. Good? Yes? Okay, so I'm going to pick another hands-on lab, and then we'll kickstart this thing. And we'll just take a moment. How many of you have heard of Live Mesh? One person. So Live Mesh is another product we are beta testing right now, where it allows you to share data in the cloud and on your desktop. In fact, you have a virtual desktop where you can store files, and it allows you to connect your files no matter what machine you're using. So you can use a mobile device, you can use your laptop, you can use the web, and it will cross-synchronize all these things across the web and the desktop and so forth. So if any of you are interested in that, let me know. And also, I promised before, I have copies of my book, the book I wrote on Team System, in PDF format. So if you want a copy of my book, you simply have to email me and I'll provide that to you. Or maybe I don't want to share it and put it on my drive. My publisher might not be too happy about that. So I'm going to register for this, and then we'll get started with the class diagram. I'll have 90 minutes to create a class diagram and start testing it. Okay, I'll confirm my attendance in the event, and then off we go. And in fact, in some cases, if you run some of these virtual labs, you will get points towards prizes and things like that. We often hold virtual lab competitions, not competitions, but more drives to get people to use the virtual hands-on labs. And then you can, we give away mobile devices and so forth. Okay, so now it's preparing the lab. What's interesting in the back end is that it actually destroys and creates hands-on labs virtually through virtual server in our infrastructure. And this is a really great way, without having to install the product, to test out stuff if you wanted to know how it works and some of the functionality. So just take a few moments. And you know what, rather than start with a class diagram, I'm just going to jump into testing, because this whole session is about testing. So I have a story for you while we're waiting. Does anybody know who actually designed the Xbox 360? First of all, the first Xbox. Who created the first Xbox in terms of visual design, the black box with the Xbox? Nobody knows? Believe it or not, it's Nike. Nike created the visual design for the original Xbox. So there came a point where they tried to decide who should design Xbox 2, which was codenamed Xenon and now named Xbox 360. So they brought in Nike. They brought in the second company who branded a lot of really like big brands like Kellogg's, the big K-M, and some other brands. And then they brought in this third company that was totally out of left field. So the first company came in, Nike, and they gave a really good presentation with PowerPoint slides and demoed exactly what the Xbox 360 would look like, and they did a great job. And then the second company came in, very professional, 5 of them with laptops and diagrams and even the mock-up of the 360 of what it could look like. And then the third company came in, and the guy was wearing jeans and this ratty shirt. He comes in with a piece of cardboard and a pen. And then he goes, this is what the original Xbox was like. So he puts the cardboard, puts it through his head, and starts screaming at the top of his lungs. And everybody around the table, Jay Allard was there, who was the manager for the Xbox project. And everybody was taken aback. He's like, what's going on? And the guy said, the original Xbox was the Incredible Hulk. And then he took the cardboard off his head and he goes, here's what the new Xbox is going to be like. So he went, and did this karate move. And essentially, he said, the new Xbox is going to be Bruce Lee. So he just started drawing stuff on a whiteboard of what the new Xbox would look like. And his company was selected as the company who designed the Xbox 360. So can anyone tell me what that company was? And no, it's not a running shoe. The company is Burton Snowboards. They're the ones who created the Xbox 360 visual design. And if you take a look at the design of it, it looks like a snowboard. A little tiny story there. So here we are. We're inside the hands-on lab. Okay. So I'm going to go full screen to begin with. Hold on. And I apologize for the delay in getting this up and running. I'm going to click on Start and go up to Visual Studio 2005, and this will launch Team Suite. So there's a bit of lag. I guess many people at this conference are using the internet for some reason. At least I don't have to set up Visual Studio on my own machine. So as you can see, the servers are quite quick from the Microsoft side, so it renders everything very quickly. So what I'd like to do is to create a new test project related to tests. I'm going to close this window for now. I'm going to close this. And I'm going to click on File, New, Project. Wait a few seconds. And then I can select different types of projects. Specifically, you can see that there's C# projects down here. And if you scroll at the bottom, there's a test project. So I can select the test project and call it My Tests. Okay, I'm just going to call it test project. Should get it the way it is. So an interesting fact about the test project is you can associate it, or you can essentially in your solution you can add test projects to your regular projects, or you can segregate your test projects apart from your regular projects. It depends on what you're planning to do with the tasks. If you want to automate the tasks, it might make more sense to have a separate test project. If you have a developer who just wants to run unit tests in his own testing, you can add the test project within the project, and what it will do is it will build the test project, run it, and run your standard project, and run the unit tests against the project and figure out whether there are issues right away. So the tester will be notified, or the developer will be notified if there's any problems. So I'll create my test project, click OK. It will build here. You'll notice a few characteristics of the test project. So the test project typically comes with built-in unit test and manual tests. And this test run configuration and this VSMDI file. So the test run configuration allows you to configure all the tests within that specific project. So the first screen really is where you can define a naming scheme for your projects. And if you're doing distributed load tests, this is where you configure what controllers you want to use and what agents for the load test. So right now, if I want to run a load test, it's going to run locally, and I can add the different controllers here for the other tests. Pardon? Yes, correct. Yes. So you would put the controller here and the agents here. But, sorry, I didn't understand your question. Yes. Yes. And you would need to install a control agent on a series of servers, right? Yes, that's correct. And the next thing we have is code coverage. So you can. This is where you this is where you add the DLLs or DXEs that you want to instrument. And so when you run the task, it will look at the code within those different code aspects. And then we have deployment. And this will allow you to target a deployment to a specific file or directory. You have host types, and as you can see, it could be a default host or ASP.NET. Setup and cleanup scripts if you need to remove files before you run the tests and add them. Test timeouts if you want to set a specific timeout if the test fails, or so forth. And this is very important if you're doing load testing, otherwise you can really overpower the CPU of your machine. Then finally, for the web tests, you can define a basic default set of values for different network type and browser types. So if I click here, you'll notice that there's Internet Explorer, Netscape, Pocket PC, and smartphone. You can create your own types. So if you want to represent Firefox or Safari. And here, the network types, it covers the entire range, including dial-up. So I'm going to close this for the time being, and now I'm going to create a web test. Yes? Does it... yes. It fully supports unit testing. And if you want, I can... So here's what I'll do. I can cover it right now, how you would create a unit test and what it looks like. So rather than start a web test, I'm going to start with a unit test. I'm just going to verify to see some of the hands-on labs, they actually have projects that are already created. Oh, what do you know? So if I go under unit testing lab, so So by the way, you see these files here in the virtual lab. These are precisely the same files and the same manuals as the ones I uploaded onto the file share. So you can use the same environment, and the VPC also contains the same thing. So what you can do is open any given C# file or VB file to create unit tests. And I'm just going to click anywhere within my class, right click, and then say create unit tests. And this will allow me to go into my different, the different components that I've defined, the classes and the methods, and the members, properties, and to create different unit tests for these different components. So as you can see, the cell hasn't been defined with unit tests, so I'll create some unit tests for this cell. So an important part here, okay. An important thing to do here, depending on what kind of project you've opened, is to click on the Settings tab, because it'll allow you to change the parameters of the unit test. So here, what it will typically do is take the name of the specific member that it's creating a test for, and then add a prefix of that name for test. And you can change the naming conclusion. And what happens is, by default, when you create unit tests, it lists them as inconclusive. And so the unit test won't work out of the box. You have to create the asserts for your tests in order to make them work. And in fact, we can take a look at the asserts in a second. I'm just going to click OK. And you could also decide whether you want a specific unit test written in VB or C#. So you can pick the language that you wish to use. It just will create empty unit tests without inconclusive. So let me show you what I mean. So if you take a look here, in this unit test, I can increase the font. If anybody have problems seeing the code? So you'll notice that there's a basic assert that the value is equal to the VSTS training, and this inconclusive will essentially fail the test. But what I can do is just add other asserts based on, whatever test it is. So if I type assert dot, it'll provide me with equality conditions, fail, inconclusive, and so forth. So it has the same richness of different members for the unit test as NUnit would have. And what's cool about this is it will run nicely on Visual Studio 2008, 2005. It will run on Team System supports this out of the box. And if you are using NUnit and you want to start using these, there's a conversion tool which will allow you to convert your NUnit tests into the Team System version. And in fact, on channel 9, there's a chart which shows you what the NUnit assert looks like and what the corresponding Team System assert looks like. And they don't really vary that much, because the person who created this, his name is James Newkirk, and he's the one who created NUnit. So he just created a Microsoft version of NUnit for unit testing. And you might be asking yourself, why would Microsoft create another unit testing framework? And it's because we have a certain naming convention for our APIs and so forth, so that we created one that fits in within the rest of our APIs, and it's an investment we're making in unit testing in the long run, because we feel it's really important that developers unit test their work. So that's unit testing. What I can do is also, as I mentioned before, is include a web test. So if I click here, you'll notice that we have a variety of tests, including web tests. I'll click on web test. How many of you were at my Rosario discussion yesterday? One person. Okay. Well, yesterday I mentioned that there is this tool called the Test Case Manager and a Test Runner, which will allow you to run automated tests on your WinForm applications, and specifically in an upcoming version of Rosario, you'll be able to do UI testing on your WinForms, which is really interesting and good functionality. Plus, all the manual tests, which were previously done in Word, can now be automated. So you click on different steps through your WinForm application or your web application, and you'll get that. So here's the web version of this, and it was available in 2005. So I'll just enter a website here. I'm not sure if there is one available. One thing I can do, actually, is go back into my environment. And I've done this before, where you'll notice I open the Solution Explorer, and I can now open up the Team Explorer, which will provide me with a view of all the team projects on my system. So what I'll do is I'll go specifically on my team portal, and I'm going to run some web tests on the portal pages to see how performant it is and if there are any problems with the portal pages. So if you create new pages, the whole point of this is rather than have somebody clicking through different steps and verifying that software, the changes you made on a specific page or any kind of updates that you've made to your website haven't broken the core functionality, the core use cases for your project, you can do it in an automated way where it will tell you if there's an error that comes up, or if it doesn't, if the expected result wasn't what you wanted. So what I'll do is I'll go into my AdventureWorks project, and it will load up all of the assets. And I'll go into my documents. Then you'll notice I have a whole bunch of stuff. I can right-click here. Actually, I can right-click on AdventureWorks and go directly to my project portal. So that's what I'll do right now. And as you can see, as I go to my project portal, it started recording the different pages that I'm clicking through. So I can say, click on project management. I can go to documents and lists. Now there's an important thing to consider. If you wanted to create web tests for Ajax-based applications, there's a tool called Fiddler, which you can download at fiddlertool.com, which will create these web tests and will capture asynchronous calls between the browser and the server. This specific tool here does not capture asynchronous calls, but Fiddler will produce, and you can say export as a web test, and it will produce a web test that's fully compatible with the system. So that's very useful for Ajax. Okay, so the web test doesn't capture third-party tools. Can you mention what tool? So just to let you know, web test is simply a proxy. It's not running in IE. It's a proxy between your browser and the server. It will capture whatever traffic's happening back and forth. It will not necessarily capture activities that are happening in the browser. It will only capture communication. So if there's JSON or any packets of data being passed back and forth, then it will capture that kind of traffic, no matter what tool or what component is on the page. So it may be that the component you're using isn't really communicating with the server, or maybe communicating with the server in the If it's using Ajax, then I'd highly recommend using Fiddler, and it will capture that traffic passing through. Right. So the next version of Rosario, they're thinking of putting in that Fiddler functionality into the web test directly. But yeah, currently you would need to use Fiddler to capture that traffic and then import it into Team System. So what I'll do, I'll stop the recording. And if I return here into my solution, you'll notice that it created, created a web test. Now, what I can do now is click on this play button and it will replay every single click I've made. It could also record the duration of time that I spent on every click. You can extend this by providing conditions for each one of the different clicks and different areas that you're clicking through. For example, you'll notice here there's a request plugin and a web test plugin. So if you want, you can verify that the post information or the get information is correct. You can verify that there are HTML tags that are present within the page as a condition of test passing if the HTML tags are not. So this would be good. You could feasibly create a plugin that checks for XHTML compliance on the page, and make sure that the XML declaration is at the top of the page and so forth. So what I can do is right-click here, and there's a number of things you can do, including adding a comment. You can add additional steps if you haven't programmatically and just using this visual tool. And the one thing you'll notice is as soon as you create a web test, although it's visual here, I can open the web test as code. Just going to save my test again. I'm just going to close this. And I'll show you that you can right-click on the web test. And in fact, I think the option's right here, where you can generate code from the web test. Yeah. So here's the generate code icon. Then it'll create a CS file. You can take a look at the CS file, and then you can programmatically alter all the different steps of that web test. So as you can see, there's something called think time. So it'll come up in a second. So first of all, the first thing I'd like to point out, I'm just going to bring it up, is that it uses a specific namespace, Microsoft.visualstudio.testtool.webtesting. And if you scroll down, you can set the think time, which will set the amount of time delay between requests. And you can push query string parameters or other types of parameters into the request. So if there's a post that you're doing, or if there's a special type of operation, this is where you can do it. So programmatically and using the web test itself. So now there's a tool that's included in Team System called mstest.exe, And I can save this test project, and then I run the test project within this command line. And it will actually run through the web test programmatically in command line, and then provide output a result, which can be inputted into Team System, into Team Foundation server. So why would you want to do that? That's for automation of its test, and this is very specific to 2005. That's the way you would do it. If you could also, so I can also run the tests here manually by going to Test, and you'll notice there's a few windows, including the Test View or the Test Manager. I can use either one. So let's pick the Test View for the time being. And it'll bring up another window, which will list all of the tests that I've created. I'm just going to scroll down. And pick one of my web tests. In fact, I'll pick the coded version of the web test. And right click and say, I want to run this test. Or run selection. Here we go. Oh, I see, okay. I forgot to check out my project before trying to do this, so the files are locked right now. That would explain the process. I'm just going to try running it. They'll probably give me a punishment. But that'll be a good option, yeah, okay. So this would be a good opportunity to check out my code before I do anything. So I'll go back into the Team Explorer. Oops. Any questions in the meantime? So how can you check for the right. So what you can do is, well, obviously you would need validation on your web application, but the one thing you can check is that it's mostly to check the code that you're outputting into the browser, right? As opposed to, and you could also check the return request from the user, but I guess the purpose of it would be you would receive a query string from the user of or post information from the form with the username and a password if that's information you want to pass through. And what you would use the web test to do is to verify that the response that your application is providing to that specific scenario. For example, if somebody tried to buffer overrun the username and password, that the server responded appropriately with the right code and the right HTML and the right response from a communications standpoint. So you can test for that. But the actual validation of your data has to be done from a code perspective, not through the web test specifically. So the web test is fully compatible with Safari, Firefox, and IE, or any other browser you're using. In terms of other operating systems, you're talking about the Rosario test. I'm not quite certain. They haven't added that functionality completely into the operating system, although they announced the functionality. So at the point that they do announce it, then we'll know what operating systems are supported. I believe they stated that it was WinForms. Therefore, it implies that the Windows operating system to begin with, and it would make sense. We would support development on Windows initially, at least, and then add more functionality as we go. So So if I go here, I can click on AdventureWorks, go into my source control for that specific project, then I can check out my code so I can actually run my tests. So you'll notice under AdventureWorks, I have a series of different branches. So you can check it out here, or you can go into your solution. And specifically, it's in okay, so this one wasn't added to source control. For some reason, the files are locked. So I would just need to change the read-only condition on those files to basically run the test and to save my project. I can do that, or I can move on to other things. Did you want to see other kinds of tests? Yes? No? Yes. So what I can do in order to check in my code, I can create a workspace. And to explain what a workspace is, it's simply a relationship that you create between a local folder and an online source folder. So essentially, by creating that workspace, any changes you make into that folder will be compared with the server. And if you do a get latest, it will compare the two and will pull down code from the server. And if there is a conflict, it will raise a conflict where you can decide whether, through a differentiating tool, whether you want to accept the changes on the server or the changes locally. So that's version control. So what I'll do is I'm going to add yet another test. You know what? I can get it through existing items, but the easiest way to set up the test is through the test project itself. So I'm going to go back to my test project and add more additional test to that project. Just to explain what the different tests are, the load test will allow you to see how your application responds to different stresses on the application based on the number of users. The limit for a single machine is about 1,000 users. If you exceed 1,000 users, you may find your computer to be highly unresponsive, and I can tell you that from experience. If you want a greater number of users, that's where the controller agent infrastructure is helpful. Then you can set up dedicated machines which will run 1,000 users or more. If you set up 10 machines, you can just try to access your application at once. Very useful for testing scenarios where you may have online sweepstakes or a condition where a lot of people will be accessing your application in a very short amount of time. It'll give you some realistic load testing figures. The second one is the web test, which I've demoed. So essentially, it's a manual test for web, and it's automated. So it allows you to programmatically check that your web application is still functioning the way you're expecting it to. The third one is the manual test. So essentially what you do is you create a Word document, and the way it works is that you run the Word document in the the test tool, and the tester is expected to walk through each one of the steps, then assert whether the test was successful or it failed. The ordered test is just a way of organizing your different tests. So it's not a test per se, but it's rather an organization, a collection of tests that you can place together. And the generic test is really a very cool test because it allows you to plug in EXCs and other test types, other frameworks. So, for example, you can use Mercury Test Runner as an example of another test framework that will run a test, and then you can incorporate the results of that test into Team System. So that's where the extensibility of Team System comes into play to a certain degree, where you can bring in results from an external tool. And in the hands-on lab, there's a specific lab on how to use the generic test. So we're just about to go on to our next session. So is there one last thing you wanted to see before I wrap this up? Will I cover code coverage in the session? Specifically, no, because I'll be covering project management and development. Although I could probably do it in the development aspect of it. And that data is captured, and then you can look at what unit tests exercise the code that you exercise. That's part of VSTS 2000, yes. Yes, so you can test third-party web services. What it will do is it will capture the raw data, the post and get from that service. If it's an asynchronous service, you can use Fiddler. So what I've seen done is an application that simulates a client application in terms of being able to accessing the web service at a frequency that corresponds to that of an application. And most of the time, these web service web tests are created by hand to simulate that interaction. So you can use the web test with WCF services. You can use the web test with standard web services to see what kind of results you'll get. Oracle's working on provider for that tool, and I think 2005. At one point, there are going to be more providers, and you'll be able to target other types of systems. But for the time being, that's what's going on. Okay. Can you repeat that question? Okay. So I'm going to do one last test, and then I'm going to move on to project management. How many of you are interested in project management? Okay, and that would be a good topic to cover. So let me start with generic tests very quickly. As I mentioned before, the generic test is used to verify that the results of a test that's outside of Team System. So if you're using third-party tools to do your testing, you can bring in the results of that test into Team System. So I'm going to pull up the hands-on lab specific to generic testing, and I'll follow with this test. So you'll notice that it brings up this generic test window. So here I can enter the name of an existing application, an EXC, that I want to target as a generic test. And I believe the one I'll probably want to open is the command window, just to simulate that third-party test. So this specific task, what it'll do is check a ping on a remote server. And if the pinging was successful, then the test will succeed. If the pinging was unsuccessful, it will not succeed. So just hold on 1 second. Basically what was outlined in the session originally, or in the track description. So, about a quarter of the room. Who wants to basically just ask a question, and I'll show you exactly how it works in the system. Okay? So I guess everybody wants to do it exactly as the track, so that's fine. I'll continue on. So essentially, now I've created a generic test. And now I need to add a specific target exe that I want to access. So there's a specific folder, tests that I can access. I'm going to close this window, a couple of windows, and then we're going to take a look at that in a moment. I'm going to show you a quick slide to set everybody in the same space. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm using hands-on labs online. So the hands-on labs are based on Visual Studio Team System 2005. It's an introductory level hands-on labs. And we're going to cover work items in SharePoint and Excel and project integration within Team System. Here are the resources for the hands-on labs, and I can zoom into the resources. So essentially, I've placed 3 types of lab manuals online. The first one is for Rosario, so you can download the Rosario VPC and run through these hands-on labs to get a full understanding of what Rosario can do. And then for Team System 2005, I've added 2 types of hands-on labs. The first one is a basic hands-on labs, which is what I'm running through right now. And also an advanced hands-on lab. So if the basic stuff isn't, is too basic for you, then you can run through the advanced. And it talks a lot about customization and extensibility of Team System. So on top of the VPCs, so I've provided 3 VPCs, the Rosario, the basic training, and the 2008 VPC. At the very end, there's also a Team System virtual lab environment. And this is what I'm using today in order to show you some of the features of Team System. So virtual lab environment is very good if you don't want to even download the VPC. And most VPCs are typically about 5 gigabytes in size or more. So, depending on your bandwidth, it's a lot of data to bring down. So the virtual lab environment will allow you just to interact with the environment and test out. And some virtual labs actually have a point system. So if you run through a series of labs, sometimes you're entered into contests where you can win things. So what I'll do is I'm going to go back into my environment. And just to let you know, the virtual lab that I'm using will expire in 40 minutes. So I'm going to have to reload a new virtual lab in order to show you some of these other things. What I'll do is click on Start and go into Excel and show you what the project management experience in Excel looks like. Your project. So what I can do is save my work. Item list. I'm going to call this scenarios. You can set constraints on who can make changes to your work items. And in fact, you can set it up so that if anybody alters a work item, you receive a notification using the object model for work items. And I've seen that implemented in some companies. Can you do the same thing in web access? Yes, you can. But rather than connecting with Excel, you'd just be directly looking at the list of work items as you would inside of the Team Explorer. Yeah, this can be maintained in the... Yes. So I'll show you where the history of those different changes are stored. And since that data is being stored within the data repository within Team Foundation Server, you can mine that data and look at historical reports of your work items. The one thing that is important to consider is that you can't delete work items. So you may be asking, how do I manage the work items that are no longer applicable to my project? And what I've seen people do is to create a state for the work item called deleted. So essentially, when you, in your queries, you would say, please query all the work items except the ones where the state is indicated as deleted. And it will give you all the current active work items. And you could also get a query of all your deleted work items also. So you just create that additional state. In the next version of Team System, they're looking into allowing you to delete work items. The core reason why you wouldn't want to delete work items is that if you want to be able to audit your process, and if you want to be able to store a clear record of who has done what throughout a project, then Team System by default just retains all that information for you. And it's very useful for, in cases, as I mentioned before, there's Sarbanes-Oxley and other kind of governance requirements for projects where you would need to track and have that accountability in your project. So is there a specific role and responsibility that decides who wants to create a user? So that can be determined, it's on a project-by-project basis, depends on the size of your team. Usually it is a project manager that decides who, not creation of user, but rather who gets assigned to what project and who has permissions over what assets in the project. For example, developers may not necessarily need to touch the tests that the testers are using. The build team may not necessarily need access to everything, to the reports that the project manager is looking at. The project manager may want to assign the business analysts some views into the project, the reporting, so that they can provide feedback and give the business analysts the ability to enter vision statements and other types of assets that are required for the project. Yes. Then on a corporate level, it would be your IT department, that would add them onto the Active Directory. And then through Active Directory, you can then add permissions to them on the Team Foundation server, into different groups on Team Foundation server. And then they would automatically be assigned rights to individual projects, or you can just have general rights as a developer across all projects. Everything should be managed through Active Directory if you're doing it. Okay. So what I've done is I've synchronized this, and now that data is into Team Foundation server. So if I refresh the list to query of the different work items, I can now see that it's Unit Manager. to answer your question, if I go into Team Explorer, just take a moment. There's a bit of a lag because I'm doing this over the internet. This is a virtual lab. And I'm sure about 500 people are trying to access the web right now. So once I go to Team Explorer, what I can do is right-click on my project. And you'll notice in a second that I have Team Project Settings. Try this again. So there's Team Project Settings and Security. So essentially, you can set the security for this specific project by assigning different groups with different security permissions over the project elements. So here we have the build service, which you would typically give to your build administrator or your release manager. You have contributors, which includes everybody who's involved in the project, so developers, testers, project managers, project administrators, and readers who, you can consider maybe a really high-level CEO who wants visibility into the project but not necessarily be able to do anything within that project as a reader, so you can include them. You can see the series of permissions here. The power of this comes when you map out these different groups to Active Directory groups. So when you automatically add somebody within a group in Active Directory, it will automatically assign rights within each individual project and each individual project's Team Foundation server. So there, you can go pretty granular with the permissions in Team Foundation server. You can go on a server-wide basis, you can go into the project, or you can even go for individual branches within a source tree or individual work items. So it's up to you how granular you want to go and what kind of permissions you want to assign. As you know, when you do any kind of security or administration, the more granular you go with the permissions, the more difficult it is to administer and the more overhead you have. So setting a more general group, doing that analysis at the beginning, identifying those main groups that need a certain set of permissions, and then tying that into on a project level is probably the right level of granularity you want to apply for security. Correct. So you would need somebody who has domain knowledge of Team Foundation Server to be able to add people to Team Foundation Server to do the server backups and so forth. I wrote a book called Professional Team Foundation Server, which covers the whole operational cycle of Team Foundation Server from an administrative perspective, disaster recovery, some of these other scenarios. And yes, somebody should be tasked with that responsibility, being able to add users and so forth, set permissions. Okay. Yes, you can add new roles into so typically what you want to do is add the roles within, if it's work group, then you would add the roles within the server itself and then add them into Team Foundation server. If it's Active Directory, then you would add the roles. So the groups aren't added directly into so I'll give you an example. What I can do is click add, and it will query my server, or the server Windows 2003. I'm not sure what server is used on this virtual image, but and then give me a listing of all the groups I can add to the server. So these are the ones that are local to my Team Foundation server. what I can do is right-click and look at the security settings for the server itself, which I can show you in a second if you're interested. There's also on CodePlex an administration tool for security that's been set up, because there's some complexity in security when you take a look at holistically a team system. There's a security model for Team Foundation server, but there's different security that needs to be set for SharePoint services and for reporting services. And the permissions for each one of these different security models don't necessarily correspond one-to-one. So you have to map out, okay, for, say, a contributor on Team Foundation server, what kind of permissions would they have in SharePoint? And this tool allows you to essentially take the contributor and map out these different types of permissions across those three components of Team System. You have to add the permissions in all three places. Otherwise, what will happen is if you don't, this report folder will have a little X on it, meaning that you don't have permission to access the report folder, or whoever hasn't been set up within reporting services or SharePoint services hasn't been set up. So what I can do is right-click here. Go to Team Foundation Server Settings and Security. Then you can see that there's three specific accounts, and these accounts have been added to the server. And this is where you have the ability to create new projects, create workspaces. So obviously, all the developers would need the ability to create a workspace to check in the code. Or, depending if you have a higher level of constraints within your project, and you only want the lead, the development lead, to be able to merge code or do any of those kinds of things, then you would give the project lead the permission to create the workspace for the individual developers on the team. And all the developer would have is permission to be able to check in code and check it out. And so there's different types of branching structures you can take. One I've seen very commonly is a different branch for each developer, which merge into a development branch. Then that development branch goes into a testing branch, and the testing branch goes into a release branch. And essentially, so every developer has permission to go into the development branch and to merge in results into the development branch. Or you can have it so that the lead developer takes a look at the code quality in each individual branch, depending on the developer. And if the code quality is enough, then we'll merge into the development branch. Development branch runs tests to see if there's a certain level of quality there. Then you merge into the test branch, and then the test branch would go through the barrage of numerous tests to make sure that the code is very stable. And then the release branch, where you would have builds, full builds of the application that you want to release. Pardon? So is the different tracking, defect tracking, yeah. So bug tracking is a part of this, and in fact it ties into all of the project management tools that we're looking at in security and so forth. So what I can do is go into my team project, and we can take a look at the different work items that are available and what the use of each work item is destined for. So I'm just going to expand my work item folder. Oops. So you'll notice that we have two types of queries. We have team queries and my queries. So essentially, team queries are queries that are accessible to everybody on the team. My queries are individual queries. So you may want to create a query that says, please list all of my personal work items, and it will provide you with that list, as opposed to providing you with the work items of everybody on the team. So if I click here and right click on work items, click on add a work item. Give me a second here. Because of the lag, so here we go. So we have a bunch of different work items that are available by default. These are the work items that are very specific to the Agile MSF process. You can obviously create your own work items based on the kind of tasks that your team goes through. So you were mentioning defects. Do we have defect tracking within Team System? And there is a bug work item which will help you track those different defects. A quality of service requirement is simply a non-functional requirement like security, performance, reliability. So you can add these different requirements in there and track them and track the progress of the project with these specific requirements. A risk is very interesting, and if you were at my talks yesterday, I gave you a little bit of insight, but the risk is used for continuous improvement. So what you can do is at the beginning of your project, you can assess all of the risks, do a risk management assessment to determine if there are any risks that may cause problems to your project. For example, and I'll use the same example I used yesterday, if you're writing a mobile application for a device, and that device may not be available by the time you release the software, then there is a risk there. And so what you can do at the beginning of your project is to create a risk work item and then associate task work items to that risk. So if that risk occurs, then there's a series of tasks that you can apply to it to mitigate that risk. And the task may be maybe use the emulator to verify that the application works, or delay the project by a month, or it could be a number of things, right? But at least you'll have that risk mitigation infrastructure in place within your project. Another use for the risk is during the course of your project. Let's say Darren broke his leg, and during the course of the project, he broke his leg and it caused a delay in the release of software because you're missing a team member. So you can indicate in the risk work item this risk that occurred. So essentially, because of this team member injured himself, we were delayed 2 weeks. And when you do the post-mortem at the end of the project, you can then mitigate that risk. So another example I used earlier was essentially a team member had left the development team and had not commented the code. So there was a 2-week period in which the entire development team had to reverse engineer code to figure out what it did exactly. And so they added that as a risk. And at the end, during the post-mortem, I was present. And they were asking what kind of options they could use. So the creation of a code analysis rule during check-in was created to verify that a comment was added to every single line of code, or to every method and class. And what ended up happening was now they had implemented within their process this check of the comments, and essentially averted that risk for future projects. So they've improved their process in the development of this risk infrastructure. So why would you want to go through this continuous improvement? It's improving the maturity of your development process, essentially, through your users. So you can automate. Some of it is simply just, human resources management. For example, in the example of the person who broke his leg, obviously the way to mitigate that is to have a backup team member ready to jump in if somebody leaves the team or if somebody gets injured. In the case of this, procedural stuff, you can automate some of this to improve the process as you go along in other projects. So at the end of every project, if you keep doing this post-mortem, you'll find yourself very highly optimized as you go along. The scenario is clearly a use case or scenario which encompasses a number of tasks. So the scenario may be a user goes on a website and purchases CD. And then you can add the series of tasks that are involved in adding that specific functionality onto your project. Now, the description I gave is far too vague for an effective scenario. You would need a scenario like user cannot access website. User can access website. And in fact, I provided a walkthrough of a tool called the Security Threat Modeling Tool, which provides a list of different scenarios that you can use for a model of what the scenarios look like. Just out of curiosity, do most of you use scenarios and tasks to measure projects, or is it something that you do? How do you typically estimate on a project? Based on a task? Do you estimate based on time to task, or is it? Okay. So this gentleman said, based on historical data, they use the time it takes to test the task and to run a task to estimate the length of a project. There's a number of different estimation techniques, and this ties into project management. If you're into agile project management, there's a technique called NUTS. Anybody tell me what NUTS stands for? It's an acronym, of course. No? Okay. NUTS stands for Nebulous Units of Time. And this will provide the exact velocity of how your team. And the technique works like this. So essentially, you bring in your entire team into a project, and you decompose the different features of the project, and you estimate in NUTS the complexity of a project, of each feature. So essentially, the team members will come to a consensus that creating a UI for a website might be one nut, because it's not very complex and may take a very short amount of time. The creation of maybe a data layer for an application may be more complex, so maybe a 3 nut. And you go through this process of feature by feature. If the nut level is too high, a 5 nut, then it needs to be further decomposed so that you can break it down into a list of 1 to 4 approximately. So once you've done this, then you allow your team to work on a project without being hindered by time constraints, and to see what velocity they work on that project. And what will happen is, as they work through feature by feature and complete them, you will get a range of time that it took to complete that feature. So as you take a look historically across all of these different features and a nut assessment of the feature, you'll be able to say that a 1 nut takes approximately from 3 to 7 days to complete. So therefore, when you do your estimation, the more data you collect on your own team in terms of nut value, the more accurate your assessment will be. So if you take the high end of that value that you 3 to 7, then you take the 7 and you run through. So what you would do before you do your estimation is go with your team, do the nut assessment, then apply the high end value to each nut in terms of time, and then you'll get a fairly accurate amount of time that will require for you to complete that task, plus a little buffer, of course, for conditions where you don't have any control. But it'll give you an idea of exactly what the estimate will be. So that's an interesting way of doing it. In Team System, there are reports that very specifically provide that view of how much work is completed at any given point, how much work is remaining, and will give you a very clear view of exactly when work will be completed, because you can see the curve of work being completed bit by bit, and you can actually see, looking by a ruler, you can tell at what point the team should complete the work. And if you see too much work that has not been completed, you can assess whether the testing is taking too long, or whether it's just that the developers aren't producing fast enough. So from a project management perspective, you can either assign new developers into the project to speed up the development process, or slow down the testing, or speed up the testing, or any other task like that. And a task is simply just a task of developing a piece's functionality, right? And that would be a decomposition of the use case or the scenario. So any questions about any of this? Yeah. Where do you choose a process model for your project? So just to warn you, this session's gonna, not this session here, but my session's gonna end in 5 minutes here, so I'm gonna have to reboot my virtual lab in order to show more stuff. So to create a new project, what I can do is click on my server. Second. It says new team project. This will bring up a wizard, which will allow me to name my new team project. And what are we going to name our project? Okay. The Great Developer Summit Project. This is specifically MSF, and in case you don't know, MSF is not a process in itself. It's a methodology in order to create a process. It's a framework for creating processes. So you may have a process in place that has very mature parts, very complete parts that you're very comfortable with, and you may have parts of your process where you feel that it's not as developed. So what you can do is use MSF as a starting point to further develop those parts of your process that are not fully developed. Some people have fully implemented MSF just as a process and have been successful with it, but it was never designed to be used that way. You'll notice if I go back to my desktop, so I'm going to cancel this for the time being. Move to my desktop. Here I have a Scrum process in this folder. So it's a Scrum process template that I could upload into my Team Foundation server. And if we take a look at the work items, you'll notice that it has a backlog, a defect, impediment, release, review, and user story, which are the typical assets. So you use your user story to create your scenario, for example. And your backlog can be contained within that Excel spreadsheet, so you can look at the backlog of work that needs to be done and so forth. So another thing you may be asking is how do I upload, how do I manage my processes? I'm going to go back in here, and I have literally 2 minutes. So I'm going to click under Team, and if we go under Team Foundation Server Settings, you'll notice that there's a Process Template Manager. And with this Process Template Manager, I'm able to upload or download process templates. So I can download the ones that are included by default on the Team Foundation server, and it will provide me with a folder. It'll provide me with a folder with these XML files, much like the one I showed you for the Scrum process. There is a tool you can use called the Process Template Editor, which is an add-in that's included within the Team Foundation. What is it called? The Team Foundation something pack. And I'm going to open up my VPC. So you'll notice that it has a typical Gantt chart, like, and as come to expect if you use project. How many of you use project for project management? Oh, quite a few. Okay, that's good. How many of you use Excel for project management? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5, 6. All work items here. Okay. So as you can see, I have a list of different work items for this project. I can click OK. And the duration hasn't been listed here. Actually, what I'll do, I'll try to open it up for other projects and see what can be done. But essentially, what you can do is set the duration of your project and set predecessors for your project too. So what I'll do, I'm going to close this for the time being. I'm going to open up another team project. Any questions so far about this? So in Rosario, the completion of different tasks to complete a use case or scenario or a user story, that functionality is supported in Rosario. It's not supported in other versions of Team System. However, you can create extensibility within Team System 2005 or 2008 within the object model of work items in order for it to recognize the predecessors for that work item and to complete it, or the child tasks for that general use case or scenario that you want to complete. So here I'm going to select my work items. So here I have a test case of a patient registration UI. And essentially I can set the number of days that task takes. And let's say I want to add the other tasks. So I can go into a work item type. And I could select whatever work item makes sense. So let's say I start with the user story. And what will be the title of our user story? Anybody have any good ideas? Work. Okay, user login. So I can set the duration of this task. And so what's interesting is you could set the area path, and if there's none defined, then it isn't defined. But the area path would be essentially what feature area you're working on. So you can set up different feature areas in Team System to be, for example, you may have UI as a feature area, you may have your data, and so forth, and you can set that. The area path is used to provide filtering between your projects so that you can look at all the work items for a specific feature as opposed to seeing just a barrage of different work items. The iteration path is really important too, because you can set whether you're in the first iteration, second iteration, then as you're in iteration 3, you don't necessarily want to look at the work items from iteration 1, so you can very specifically filter all the iterations from your project. So I'm going to put it for iteration 0. And then, so for the user login, it should be user login. So one of the tasks might be the creation of a login page. And that necessarily may only take 2 days. Right? So what I can do is go here create a subtask within the whole process of creating a login. So far the user login will only take two days because I've only defined a task within a specific project. So you can organize all your tasks as you normally do in project 2. And in earlier versions of Team System, this works perfectly and it's fine. However, the roll-up won't occur. So if you're finished all your tasks, you won't automatically be notified that your story or your scenario use case is completed. The second thing is if you store this structure into Team Foundation Server in Visual Studio 2005 2008, and then you open up a brand new sheet of Excel or project and you try to load those work items back in there, it will simply show them as a list of work items as opposed to this structured approach of organizing your project. So what's recommended is that you structure everything in terms of time and so forth, and then you save a copy of that within the portal, and then you can use that to refer back to your project. And in Rosario, you can query your work items, and it will show up as I've created here in your project. So any questions apart from that? So the main thing here is that you can place constraints here, but there's no automated tool that will contact another portion of the Team System and advise you that the task was not completed. Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. That can be automated, no problem. Whether it's part of Rosario, I'm not sure because Rosario hasn't been completed yet. It's still a CPP, which is considered an alpha version of the product. So whether that functionality will be in product, I have no idea. Can you programmatically do that? Yes, absolutely. Very, very straightforward process. Using the work item object model, you can detect the certain events, and you could also tap into the different fields in your work items. And in fact, it can query all the work items for a specific user, look for any work item which may have expired or which may not have been completed by a certain date, and then trigger emails being sent to the user or trigger emails being sent to the project manager. Or you can create this little toast application which will bring up a list of all the
the different work items that haven't been completed so that you can contact them. Yeah, there's all kinds of different, or you can create a report with that data and view the report on a daily basis to see who's on track, who's not on track. Lots of different extensibility points there and very useful information. That user on track or not on track is actually one of the reports that the team's investigating and are looking into creating for Rosary. But for the time being, it's something you can create on your own. Pardon? Yes. It's not a part of Team System. It's a product you can get separate from Team System, but it integrates with Team System. So if you get everything in web access, right? So MS Project is a pure project management tool. It has a lot of features that web access doesn't have. Web access will provide you with a list of all your work items, may not necessarily organize them in this way. And web access doesn't integrate with Project Server if you're using Project Server. So you can certainly get by using web access. You can get by using Excel to manage your project. You can get by even using Team System as your project management platform. But if you're doing serious project management, I would say Project would be a good tool to use, but not mandatory. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're asking me, where do I set the duration of any given iteration, right? So what you'll notice here is if I go, into Team System, and we're just about out of time, and soon, I believe the lunch is going to be served in any minute now, just to let you know. Click on any project, go to Team Project Settings, and set the areas and iteration. Now, as you can see, the iterations are set, but there is no set time frame for that iteration. So the iteration is not, you define the iteration as per your, so you can define the iteration within project as a 2-week period or so forth. But within Team System, it just calls it iteration 0 and leaves it up to you to define the iteration. There's no mechanism specifically that says, oh, by the way, you've passed your iteration. As you're doing your planning, then you can, if you set a 2-week period and your tasks overlap that 2-week period, then you know you bypassed the amount of time you're expecting for your iteration. What kind of process do you use for development? Okay. Yeah, there is currently no time frames for iterations. But as I explained before, when you use project, you can get a clear view of the length of time. And there are other processes like Scrum where there's a specific time frame, defined time frame that you can set. But again, the tools are there to help you manage your process, right? But they're not there to fully automate your process end to end. There's a human intervention aspect to this too. It'd be wonderful if Team System just managed your project. You could walk away and then it would send emails to all your employees and would write code for you and come back and go, oh. my project's well underway, but no. It's a facilitator, and as you'll notice, so the thing I mentioned yesterday with Rosario is that you can send in feedback to the Rosario team, and if that's really important to you, that your iteration should have a duration and is reflected in project. So if you bypass that iteration length, then it should warn you, get a little flag or a box appearing. Then you can send in that feedback to the Rosario team, and they'll investigate that as a possible feature. But otherwise, it's something that you can program in. It's possible using the object model to define different mechanisms in order to tell you whether your iteration has been passed. But it's something you're going to have to customize yourself. No problem. Yes. Yes. So estimation versus actual. Yes. That's one of the reports that's being investigated for Rosario to begin with. Second of all, if you go into any given work item, so what I'll do is I'll open up a query of my work item. So if I open the work item, first of all, you can see the test case for that work item. But there is a summary and a history of the different changes that have been made to the work item. And depending on a work item, it will also have a start and end date and so forth. I'm not sure if a test has a start and end date, but I can create a work item for a task. And so here's the estimation. So I can put an estimated remaining complete, and you can aggregate that stuff, right? And as soon as you notice with the other work item, the test case, if we take a look at the summary and specifically the history, it will tell you exactly when that work item was created, all the metrics for when the work item was created, and you could also assess when the work item was closed, which would give you the exact amount of time the project or that specific task was worked on. And you can then match that with your estimation programmatically and create a report that will show you your current with your. So open projects or closed, open tasks or closed tasks, the start date of that task, once it was created and when it was closed, to your estimation to see how far you are. That's a very important request that we got from a lot of project managers. So it's something we're investigating. Yes. Correct. Absolutely. That's good feedback. Can you estimate this? So you can define, when you define a process, you can define the iterations in advance. You can define the areas in advance. You can define a number of different things in advance. So as you're creating a new project, it will automatically plug all of that in, including the work items that are standard for any given project of your that you'd want to initiate. And I think you had a question. You're waiting. So can you integrate what with TFS? Oh, Visio. There is no direct integration of Visio with TFS. There is a number of modeling tools that's available in Rosario, which will allow you to generate code out of models. I haven't seen any visual modeling tool for project management currently. So you can create the sequence diagrams. Whether that will generate work items or generate process is a whole different question. Can you do it? Yes, you can. Will it be out of the box? Not sure. So Siebel, right? You would need to import it as a format that's compatible with Team System. For example, Team System will support UML. So if you're bringing in a sequence diagram in UML or with other types of diagrams that are supported, then you can overuse. Yes. So the links to documentation for this specific work item can be added here. So there's a number of things you can add, including a change set, which will point you directly to the version control item. So you can also put a hyperlink on the web. And as you can see, a successor, a whole bunch of different. Within this work item, you can add all of your child tasks. And on top of that, you can also add attachments, which include documentation for that specific task. So when a developer gets a task, they can open up the documentation really and keep it associated to it so that everything's contained nicely together and easy to manage. Yes? I've seen a number of different approaches. There's CompuWare that has a work item system. And the different approaches include synchronization framework, which would look at essentially using an API, pull all of your work item data and synchronize it to TFS and essentially keep the two synchronized when at a regular interval. Or so you could do it as an event-based synchronization. So if a work item changes on your current system, that would automatically change the corresponding work item in TFS and back and forth. So that would be the integration approach between the two. It's either import the data from your current system into TFS or create this integration point. Not a problem. Okay. Pardon? Yes. So how do you integrate existing projects with Team System? It depends on what your project's based on. Different products have there's different integration points based on the product. There is a few tools like ClearCase migration tool which will allow you to take their case projects and migrate them easily to Team System. But if you're using other types of project management software, then it may be a little more involved. Not terribly much, but it will just involve you to migrate the data and import it into Team System. The object model of Team System is fairly simple, straightforward. So you can usually do a one-to-one mapping of, say, a title from your work item in your current system to the title in Team System. So what I'm going to do now, there's about 25 of you in here. So I'm going to ask each one of you to give me a number between 1 and 25, since you all asked really excellent questions. And the one who selects the same number that I selected will get a free copy of Visual Studio 2008. And also SQL Server CTP plus a little coupon to get the full version once it comes out, and Windows Server 2008 Standard. So it's Visual Studio 2008 Standard, Windows Server 2008 Standard, and the CTP. So number between 1 and 25. I gotta select something. Okay, got it. So you start. Select any number between 1 and 25. 22. Okay. 21. 1? 12. Oh, actually, you got it. So it's 12. That's the one I did. So congratulations. Well done. Thank you for attending the session. Go get some food. And feel free to come back. I'll be presenting one final session on development.
So to get the lab manual, you go to this link, and yeah. So what was your question? I don't think I understood it.
You are telling this is basic level. This is a basic level one. This
Correct.
what you are telling, no?
Yes. So there's
where you can get the advanced level.
advanced level. Okay. So there are 3 sets of labs that I've included on this share. There's Rosario labs, so if you want to try the new bits with a walkthrough. There is the basic level Team System 2005, and there's an advanced level Team System 2005 on the same link. So all you need to do is go to that link, and you can access all 3 steps of this. And yes, I've included advanced level because I understand that many of you may look at the simple stuff and go, well, I know how to create a data test. I don't need to know how to do that. I'd rather go into extensibility and configuration.
What about the 2008 VPC? Is it advanced?
Yes. So here are the links to the different VPCs. So the first one for Rosario is available at this Shrinkster, shrinkster.com/y86. The 2005 Basic Training VPC, which corresponds perfectly with the hands-on labs, is available at shrinkster.com/y87. And if you want the VPC for Team System 2008, it's shrinkster.com/y88. And then finally, as a final resource, I've provided you with Team System Virtual Lab Environment. So if you brought your laptop here today, you can log on to an instance of Team System without having to install a VPC or download a VPC, which would be over 5 gigs anyways. So by the time you've downloaded it, this summit would be over. So it wouldn't be very useful. But anyways, so you can access Team System in a few minutes right away if you have the laptop. So essentially, call to action, download all this stuff, and I'm going to launch an instance of Team System and start covering some of the different aspects of development. If you have any questions during the course of this hands-on lab, it's not really a hands-on lab, it's more of a presentation, but if there's anything you'd like to see specifically, I'd be glad to give you a walkthrough. So I'm just going to log into my TFS instance. And this is very much the same VPC that you can download off the web.
using anything special. I'm going to launch Visual Studio.
Whole memory is 1K and I have allocated to 356 KB to
Okay.
VPC.
Yes, you can assign 356 for the VPC. However, it will be slow. There's not much you can do about it.
I have to give 1K. This is 1 GB. This is recommended. No?
Right. So 1 gigabyte for the VPC will give you really good performance. So again, it's either upgrading your system or doing that, or what you can do is also access the online hands-on labs. And the machines that are providing you with the hands-on labs are actually running extremely fast. It depends on the network latency of your internet connection that will cause slowness. So you can use that as a training ground if you want to use these. So, as a developer, what's the number one thing that we care about as developers?
This is another question. What is the advantage of VPC?
Pardon?
What is the advantage of VPC having TFS installed in VPC? What is the advantage?
1 gig for the VPC with TFS installed. In fact, I can show you my settings for my VPC. I go edit settings. Currently, I have 1.2 gigs for that VPC. That's why it's ready. So, I'll ask the question again. What's the most important thing to a developer?
Unit testing.
Unit testing? I wouldn't agree. That's the number one thing developers care about.
Coding.
Code! There you go.
Design.
Design?
System analysis.
So would a developer care more about system analysis or code?
Requirement.
Code optimization.
Code.
Code optimization.
Code optimization, yes.
Which will make his life easy.
Anything that would make his life easy. Yeah, shortcuts. That is what a developer cares about. So we're going to take a look at the source control system and give you an idea of how it works and so forth. So I'm going to open up my source control tree here. And as you can see, there's a source control explorer. And you'll notice that depending on the different branch that I connect to, you'll notice that there's a different workspace, or rather a different source location that's listed here. And as I've explained before, what a workspace is a physical folder on your machine that's linked, paired up with a folder in your version control tree. So what I can do here is change workspaces. And in fact, I only have one workspace. But you can see that I have a workspace that's linked on my computer. And specifically, that one folder right here, C, Documents and Settings, All Users, Desktop Healthcare, is linked to this version control folder on the web, or within my server rather, this healthcare patient monitoring project. So once I've set this, you'll notice that if I expand this healthcare node, you'll notice that this patient monitoring is now listed in black rather than gray. So you'll notice that Agile and CMMI are grayed up, but so that means that you are connecting to that specific project. That project is mapped. So how can you access the project? So if you want to check out your project, you right-click on that specific branch, and I can select this option called Check Out for Edit. And I can set different types of locks depending on whether I'm working solo or whether I've implemented a policy that I just want one developer to work on a project at a time, or whether I would like to have several developers working at the same time and just to merge in those different changes. So you'll notice here that I have keep any existing log, or I can allow a shared checkout of code, which is typically the case when you're working on a larger enterprise project. And you might be asking, well, where do I set this configuration? And if we go into Team Explorer, you'll notice if I right-click on the project and go to Team Settings and Source Control, I can now set whether I want to enable multiple checkouts or not. And one of the best practices for Team System is to get latest before you check out code. So what will happen is it will take a look at the code within your desktop, and we'll compare it to the code on the server. And if there's new code that's been provided by somebody else on the server, it will merge in the code. And if there are any conflicts, you can deal with them at that particular point in time. That means that you won't be pushing in stale code into the version control period. So what I'll do is I'm going to enable this best practice. Click OK. But specifically, I'm going to select the healthcare project since that's the one we're using right now. I'm going to do a checkout for edit. And essentially, what you'll notice is that previously, we had a little lock on the project. Now you'll notice that there's a little check mark. So the check mark indicates that the project's been checked out. The lock indicates that the project's locked or checked in. And what happens when you lock a project, or when you check it, so I'll check in the project again. Let's see. And I'll explain what these other windows are in a second. But once I check in the project, so essentially if you're using an older version of Team System, there are little locks, there are little blue locks. And when you check it in, what happens is the read-only flags apply to all the files in order to prevent you from accidentally overwriting. So I'm going to check it out again. And open up the project.
What are the new features available in 2008? Regarding source code.
So what new features are you referring to?
Pardon?
Source control is available in 2008
What are the new
Team
features
Studio.
available?
So what new features are you talking about specifically? There's a lot of features. Are you talking about this checkout, check-in? Yes, that's available in Team System 2005, 2008, and Rosario. It's available in every single one of these cases.
So what are the servers type supported?
So what?
What are the servers? Like we are using Perforce, so is that supported?
Okay, so the question was, is Perforce supported within Team System? Essentially, you can use any version control system you want and integrate it within Team System if you wish. The key thing is you won't get the nice integration that Team System will provide if you check in the code in Team System. So essentially, when you check in code in Team System, the build system from Team System can check out that code from that source repository, build it, and then generate reports based on it. With Perforce, you would have to install yet another client to be able to check in your code in Perforce, and then create some extensibility points in order to integrate Perforce into your build process, into your work item process, and so forth. So the integration isn't that great if you use Perforce. There is a lot of people who have integrated or essentially migrated code from Perforce into Team System. So there's a few tools online, I believe, that will help you in the migration process if that's something you want to do. But do they work side by side? Yes. Is there integration? Yes, but you would need to work on both. So now I've opened my project, it's checked out, so I can now apply new changes to my project. So what I'll do is go in here and do something very basic, just add a comment. Here is my comment. Okay, so I've made a change to the project. Now I'd like to check it back in. So you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different projects here, or different files that will be checked in during this check-in. The first thing you'll notice is that you can apply a comment during your check-in. And that's really important because that's the way you can document what exactly is happening in the project. Why are you checking the code? Is it that you've added a new feature? Is it that you've added a bug fix? And this comment that you're adding into your check-in will provide some metadata for searching for check-ins in the future. So once you check in and check out code, there's going to be a whole bunch of change sets that are created. And if you want to search for a specific change set, the comments become very important. And you can create a whole naming convention for your comments in order to provide that view. You'll notice here that you can associate your check-in with a work item. So let's say you are fixing a bug, and that check-in that you've created will actually complete and fix the bug, right? So essentially you can select a specific task, and you'll notice that you have two options here. You can either resolve or associate. So you can say that this specific check-in will resolve this work item, will complete and close this work item. And so it, again, creates that really great relationship between the work items that you're working through and your source code. You'll notice here there's check-in notes. So the check-in notes are useful for code reviews. If you have initiated, or if it's part of your process to have a code review, you can shelve your code, and I'll explain shelving in a second, but you can shelve your code, have somebody review the code, then add comments into these fields. And again, these are captured within each check-in, and you can do an analysis or a report of the review of the code as you go along. Finally, you have check-in policies, and if your check-in does not essentially fulfill the policies, then you won't be able to check in the code. And this is part of doing check-in policy. Essentially, what it is a code review, an automated code review through FXCOP or through code analysis. And so you might be asking yourself, well, how do I implement this code review process? So before I check this in, I'm going to show you how. If you go into Team System here, to your specific project, you'll notice that we have an option for source control. So I'm going to select source control, and then there's a tab for check-in policy. So this will allow you to integrate these different check-in policies into your check-in process. I'm going to click Add. So we have a check-in policy for work items. So essentially, it requires that a work item is associated to your check-in. So that would mean that each check-in would have to mean something and be associated. You can have a testing policy, which ensures that the tests have passed on the code. So what will happen is, just prior to check-in, it will run a test. And if for example, a unit test. And as soon as you check in the code, if the unit's tests fail, then it'll prevent the check-in. You can put in a forbidden patterns policy. So for example, if you have a very specific naming convention and somebody breaks that naming convention, you can create a forbidden patterns policy which uses regular expressions to determine whether all your naming is correct, and if not, then it will prevent the checking of the code. And then you have code analysis. So what I'll do, I'll select code analysis for the time being. And as you can see, we can enforce C and C++, or we can enforce just managed code analysis. And through here, we can ensure a number of things. The one important thing about code analysis, these are rules that we apply in the development of Microsoft software. And it's one way we can retain a sanity check to make sure that our software will work on a global scale. So we have globalization rules. And by following these rules, it will make the software much easier to manage and to globalize using specific locale-specific strengths and so forth. So what I can do is I can enforce these rules and click OK. So once I try to do the check-in, I can type in a comment. So I added comment to code, and this is obviously not the best comment you can add to the check-in, but just for illustration's sake. So I'm going to click check-in, and it appears that my code is okay and has been approved. So I've checked in my code. So you might be wondering, okay, well, you've checked in code, how do I know what versions of that code has been introduced in Team System? How do I track the different check-ins that you've done here? So what I can do is click here, and there's a whole bunch of options here, including view history. So here, I can take a look at the different change sets that have been applied to that specific line of code. And for example, I can bring up the specific change set, and you'll notice that only one file has been applied in this check-in, and it's specifically Charts Manager. And you'll notice that if I scroll down, my comment has been added here. So what if I wanted to, rather than just look at change sets, what if I wanted to compare different versions of the check-ins, right? What I can do is say compare. So I can select the latest version, or I can pick a specific change set. And so I'm going to select the one previous. And then I'm going to compare that to the latest version of the code. And click OK. And you'll notice that in all of the changes I've made, there's been a change between the chart manager. So if I open Chart Manager, you'll notice a differencing tool, which will provide me with a view of the changes from that change set, number 7, and the current local, so you can tell what change set it is right here. It says C7. And the changes from my local system. And essentially, it highlights exactly those changes. So when you're in a conflict situation, this highlighting will occur and this differencing will occur. And then you can select what chunks of code you want to merge into the main core part of your code, your checking. So any questions so far? Yes?
Can you do double check out?
Can you check out multiple things?
Like two users working on the same source control, like they both are checking out
Yes.
the same file.
Yes, you can. So
What if there is a conflict while checking?
So if there's a conflict, then it's up to the person who's checking in the code to decide what to maintain and what not to check in. And if you implement the get latest, you will minimize the number of conflicts, essentially. Because
But if both consecutively have checked out, and if both are different, are fixing different bugs or fixing some different functionalities, and if that leads to conflicts, how it is handled?
okay, so what you're saying is if you're both working on the same code and it leads to conflicts, what do you do? I wish there was like a really simple answer. You ignore the other person's code. You check in what you have. No. There is a fantastic document which I will show you right now. Hold on a second. So if you go to codeplex.com, there is a white paper that was written by the version control team on best practices for merging and branching code. And it was written very specifically for team systems. And in the white paper, it outlines exactly what are the best practices in terms of organizing your code and what to do in very specific instances, like you said, where there are conflicts. So this is running a bit slow, but that's okay. So I'll pull up the project specifically to show you what it looks like. Any other questions while this is loading? Yes?
I see a couple of new features here in social, that is log and shell training changes as compared to a normal Visual Studio.
Right.
What are these?
What is shelving?
What is shelving and what is a log? Is it a log?
Okay, so I'll explain some of those concepts. But anyways, here's the that specific project, the branching guidance, which will provide some guidance on how to use the version control system. There's also quite a few good books that have been written on the topic. Anyways. So you're talking about shelving, and I'll explain what shelving is. Essentially, there are situations, and I've encountered this personally, where with some companies, what they'll do is they'll check in the code at the end of the day, regardless of the quality level of the code. So you could have partially written code, you could have code that has full bugs, and they'll check it in because they want to preserve the code. They want to save the code. They don't want their system to crash and then lose the work that they were doing in progress. So shelving is kind of this in-between world between checking in and having it simply on your system. By shelving your code, what you're essentially doing is placing it on a shelf in the version control. It's not being checked in, but it's being stored so you can retrieve it at any given point in time. And any policies that are applied in terms of disaster recovery and backups and so forth on the server will continue. So the copy doesn't just reside on your computer, it resides also on your shelf. One of the really cool uses of a shelf is if you want to share code with another developer. So what you can do is you place it on a shelf and then ask the developer, can you go to my shelf and pull the code down and look at it?
So is this shelf right in the server itself? Is it?
So what I'll do right now is I'll add code to a shelf. You can take a look at the shelf functionality. So the first thing I'll do is check out my project. And I'm going to right click here and I'm going to select shelf. Yeah, shelf pending changes. Okay. Actually, there are no pending changes. I haven't done anything to the code yet. Add some more comments or something. Okay. Pick some other file. Class helper, yes. I'm going to add another namespace. System.data. Does it need it? No. But so here we go. And so now I'm going to go and shelve my pending changes. very similar interface as when you're checking in code. And I can provide a shell set name. So added comment to, whoa, comment to class helper.cs. I can add some additional comments here. I can associate it to a work item if I want. I could also add check-in notes. So I throw this on a shelf, and it's on my shelf.
So it's not really checked in, but
So it's not really checked in, but it's stored on the server. So what I can do is go into, let's go.
would these changes still be there on my box? Or
Pardon?
they still be there on my box?
Sorry.
If I go ahead on the older version,
Yes.
so my changes that I have on my box that are actually shared, I would get over it.
So if you get the, sorry.
Yeah, if somebody else has changed, check in some, make some changes and check in the file.
Right.
And, now I have done a lot of changes here on the box on the same file. So I want to share it. That's a good idea, right? I don't want to. I've done a lot of work here. I want to make a copy of it, keep it aside.
Okay.
I want to get the latest version of somebody who's done the changes.
Sure.
Later on, once you, is that the whole intent? So
Yeah.
I shelve it and then we get off my shelf. Somehow merge it together.
So you can merge, you can actually pull from several shelves, merge all of that stuff together. There is a power tool that's available for version control as part of the team. I forget what tool set it's part of. Team Foundation Power Tools, or it's Team Foundation Power Tools that allow you, that adds extra functionality to the version control, allow you to grab from multiple shelf sets and merge from shelf sets to resolve any kind of changes that.
Does it merge automatically, or because the old way of merging it is to just get some text command? How do you do it?
Well, what I would do is pull the shell set and then do a get latest and merge the changes. Any other questions?
What the lock?
Locking? Okay. So you'll notice here that I have the option of locking. So what that will do is prevent other people from accessing the code while you're working on it. And it's just as a temporary mechanism in order to prevent, maybe a junior developer from checking it out and doing some silly things.
It's like exclusive checkout.
So it provides a temporary exclusive checkout for that specific project.
So nobody can check out the file?
Nobody can check out the file. However, if you have administrative access to the source control system, you can check out the file, no problem. So it doesn't block people with the correct privileges from checking it out.
Can this be done from the remote location?
Can this be done from a remote location? So there is a proxy, a Team Foundation version control proxy, which will allow you to connect to a Team Foundation server from outside. So let's say you're based in Bangalore and you want to access a server in the United States. Using this proxy server, you can access the code from there, and it'll provide really good performance on the code access. So yes, absolutely. In fact, that distributed computing scenario is something very common at Microsoft. And so we built that into the product. Any other questions?
So if a person makes some changes and put it in a shell,
Yes.
some other users want to get that code in the shell.
So again, it depends on the permissions on the shelf. You can, if you set the permissions on shelves that they're open, then any user can grab the code from that person's shelf. If you lock,
Access the shell.
can I access the shelf?
Other user.
If the permissions are loose, that you can there's a permission set for shelving specifically. And if you allow everybody to access shelves, then they can. If not, they can't, right? They can only access their own shelf. And it might be a scenario where you may not want everybody to be able to access everybody else's shelf. However, you would give the team lead the project manager level permissions, and he could access everybody's shelf. So he would be able to be the one to transfer the code from one shelf to another.
Where is available the shelf file? Where is it be available in the VSTS server? How
Yes.
to get that?
So, pardon?
How to get the code in the shelf? Where is it be available?
Yeah, it's available in the server on how to pull the code from the shelf back into the system. So, hold on a second. Set. Yes.
Go to view,
Ah.
other windows,
Yes. Okay.
pending changes, and shelf.
You know what? That deserves a copy of the new 2008 standard. Go. There you go. So if I click on Unshell, as you can see on the shell set, you can see all my changes. And since I added a very descriptive shell set name, I can easily identify between the different versions of different shells that I have. I can just click on Unshell and get that specific version from the shell. Okay, but it's already pending. I haven't checked in anything. So I have to check in my code and Unshell from the other. So now I can unshell. Okay, is there any other functionality from version control that you'd like to see?
Annotate.
Annotate? Okay. Hold on a second. It's been a little while since I've used the team system. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to remember. So here's an interesting scenario. You have the merge conflict right here, and it's in a different format than you would typically expect in Team System 2005 or 2008. So here we can select auto merge, which will allow the system to make a smart choice as to whether the merge changes or not. You can use the merge tool, use the server version or the local version. So it provides a lot of information right here on how to resolve the conflict. I'm going to pick auto merge because I trust the Team System knows how I want the merges to happen. So annotate. You know what? I'm going to have to look it up because I don't remember how to annotate it. I don't use annotation very often. Is there any other features that you'd like to see apart from annotation? Yes.
There are two different teams working on different functionalities, but working on the same project. So when we want both of the team to merge the code to gigabit, how will it be done?
So how do you merge code from one team to the other? So what we could do is The matter is to create a separate branch and then merge the changes from one branch into the other, right? So one team would be working on one branch, the other on the other. Or are you talking about a scenario where they're just two teams are working on exactly the same code base?
Yeah, same code base.
Okay, the same code base would be the same scenario that we developed here, where as soon as a check-in occurs, then there would be merge conflicts or there would be some resolution. If you're smart about the way you're developing and you associate some modules to specific teams and other modules to other teams, then you will not get any kind of conflicts. That requires some foreknowledge of the architecture of your application. That requires some foreknowledge also of the stability of the different endpoints and the methods that you're going to make available for the different components. If you change the naming of specific method and a DLL, and some other component relies on it, and obviously this dependency scenario is really important. Interdependent modules can cause a huge problem. So again, part of it is how do you structure your teams to work on different source code in order to mitigate conflicts and mitigate overlap is one scenario. And the structure of your application, the structure of your code from an architectural perspective is another element. And then there's just the day-to-day management of your version control within those two teams, which is yet another thing that you think of. There's no easy answer. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Is they're all three elements are required to be successful at getting two teams working.
I work on visual source side, in which two different teams were working on two different branches. Like both are at last to be merged into a single branch. So there in the visual source console, we got an option to merge all the files by some merge option. Is there any option like that?
So the question was, in Visual Source Safe, I can merge from two different branches into one branch, essentially. And you'll notice if I click right here, there is the option to check out the code and so forth. There is branching and merging functionality here too. Let's see where it is. So if I click on a specific file, there's a branch and merge option, as you can see. So what I can do is branch this into a different branch by using the latest version of that. So it'll create a whole different branch for that specific file and work on it. So if I go in here, and I'll add more comments. So yeah, okay. I need to. There we go. Okay. So I'm now going to add my comments. And I could go to that branch and I can say merge. So now I select my source branch that I want to merge. And I can view all changes, and I can select the target branch. Hold on a second. I think I would have had to set up another branch in order to do this. Like I set up a separate file. The file's not really a branch, right? So in order to set up another branch, I would need to actually physically set up another workspace. And in fact, I can show you how I can do that. So I'm going to set up a new folder, call it source code, put it on my desktop. And you'll notice under source control here, I have an option of taking a workspace and mapping a current folder to a local folder. So I may just want to do that. I don't think this one's mapped. So I can click here and say, what is the CMMI project mapped to? I can select that new source code folder I created. So it closes. Then it creates a mapping for that specific folder. And you'll notice one of the cool things about Rosera is once you click on that folder, it gives you the local path to the mapping. And it links the two very easily. So I can just double click here and look at it. So to populate the code into my folder, I can do a checkout for edit. Get latest rather. And if I go back into my folder, I now have a copy of files which over here in name. But anyways, so I've set up, I've now set up a connection between the two. Another thing I can do is go here under source control, go to workspaces. So I've created one workspace so far. I can create other workspaces too. So I can set any given folder on the online, and I can set the local folder and source control folder. Another thing I can do is go to File, New Project, and I'll create a new project here. So for example, I may want to set up a C# Windows project. And I can right-click on the solution and say Add Solution to Source Control. And what this will allow me to do is to create a brand new folder for that version control. So I can call it New Windows Form folder. And it will allow me to essentially associate that. So now I have the option of checking in some of the code. So there, as you can see, there are pending files from my previous the previous application I was building. So I'll do that. And now you notice that in the Solution Explorer, I have this little lock, which means that the code files have been checked in and the read-only flag has been applied to it. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left in the talk. Is there any other questions you may have? Yes?
Team project which is associated with one TFS server. Can I take a backup of it and restore it on another TFS server?
Okay, so the current question is, essentially, there's a source code repository associated to a specific team server to a specific team project. And I take a current team project and associate it to a different source control server on a different server and copy the files from one server to the other. There is a project underway that will allow you to copy data from one team foundation server to another, hence allowing you to do that. I'm not sure what the status of that project is, but it has been done, it's available, it's doable. Whether we can do it today, I'm not sure. It may be a part of Rosera, I'm not sure yet. But it's something that can be done.
We had something called endlog.
So you're looking for documentation of projects. What kind of documentation are you referring to?
And the same kind of documentation for my project,
Okay.
which we used to do it using end-of utility.
Okay. So documentation of your project can be contained here in the documents node of your and within the process guidance of your specific project. So you can store all the files there. Are you talking about the generation of documentation?
Not just documentation. Documentation about our code.
Hold on a second. So,
Documentation about the code that
yes.
we build, the application that we write.
Right.
It's possible to create a documentation using a utility called end-of.
Yes, correct.
Do you have something integrated with VSTS 6008 now?
Currently, no. There is no end doc for VSTS, but it is a very good tool. And can it be integrated? Certainly. You create the documentation and add it. But there's no direct integration. Any final questions before we wrap up?
And any new modeling tools like we have class on the class diagrams? Is there any other UML tools or
Yes.
modeling is included now?
I'm happy to report there is new modeling tools in those areas, including there's class modeling, there's UML, there's sequence modeling, and others. I can show you what the modeling projects look like currently. So I'll go to File, New Project. And under modeling projects, as you can see, we have activity diagram, logical diagram, use case diagram, which uses UML, component diagram, sequence diagram. So I can select the use case diagram. And view the toolbox, and as you can see, we have we have use cases with actors and nodes and annotations and so forth. And what's really good about this is it will automatically generate code. And in fact, you can associate these use cases to the use case work item. And as use cases change, it will also change the diagrams. So no longer are you just generating this UML document that will sit somewhere, and as you're making changes to the project will never change. It will change and morph as your project changes. So thank you very much for attending this session, and thank you very much for attending the summit. And I hope to see you around. And I'm going to put up one last time my contact info. And feel free to add me on Facebook if you're on Facebook, or send me an email if you have any questions. Have a great day. Thank you.